You folks ready? Call this meeting to order, a Council and Budget Committee meeting. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, Your Worship.
There are no announcements. There's no addendum. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, it takes us to the departmental operating budgets, and I'll hand the chair over to the Chair of Corporate Services, Councillor McDermott.
Thank you, Your Worship. We're going to start off with a presentation from Jonathan Jansen, Director of Corporate Services. There's a PowerPoint presentation for us now.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome here to our general levy operating budget. This is the last piece for our 2019 budget, having approved already the water and wastewater and capital budgets. Note that, again, a copy of the presentation tonight has been posted on the town's website, should anyone wish to follow along there. And just at the onset, again, I want to give thanks to all our staff that invest a lot of time in this process, our CIO, directors, managers, our finance and payroll staff dedicate a lot of time to this budget, which is greatly appreciated. So for tonight's presentation agenda, first we'll be looking at some background and context from 2018. We will summarize the 2019 base budget and MPAC assessment changes, list the 2019 supplementary budget requests for council to consider, which are in tab 8 of your binder, provide the consolidated budget impacts for the median household and alternatively for every $100,000 in assessments, review the risks and opportunities and the multi-year forecasts, look at next steps of the budget, as well as review recommendations, the majority of which are the supplementary requests in the report. Those all have individual sheets that I mentioned in tab 8 of your binder. And then we'll open up the floor for any presentation questions. So we always like to highlight some of the budget inputs that guide the preparation of the budget. So currently, of course, we still have the previous council's strategic plan and are waiting the new capital or council's strategic plan in the coming weeks and months that will provide greater guidance for our budget. In the past, for example, in 2018, a number of initiatives such as transit enhancements and a long-term care contribution were related to the strategic plan. The long-term financial planning, the town does include 2 forecast years for our operating budget. The town has aging infrastructure, of course, and some uncertainty about revenue sources, so that does require a longer-term view to manage those issues. Council and staff have engaged in corporate studies in recent years to gain objective feedback and guidance to areas such as staffing, and that's certainly a part of reviewing our budget needs. December report number CS-20-2018 did provide an initial guidance for the 2019 budget. It did reference CPI, or consumer price indexing, available at the time of 2.5% for controllable costs, as well a corporate and community services subcommittee at various points the past few months have had conversations with the aim to limit the total tax bill increase. So tonight's sphere is the largest of the 3 that we look at with our annual budget presentation, being the general levy operations of $27 million. And this graph just demonstrates the interplay of the 3 budgets, that being also the water and wastewater and capital budgets. The general levy budget allocation structure is by departmental cost centers in a format required by the province. And this graph shows the breakdown by those different areas, the largest being the roads and transit at 31% share. It also does include the proposed support of Economic Development and Tourism Corporation for $680,000 that council heard from in February, as well as the library for $1.5 million and $200,000 annually for the future South Niagara Hospital. the tax bill at a glance in terms of total budget dollars and allocation percentages is a total tax billing of $59.8 million, of which $26.5 million is for the town itself, or as the lower tier. $24.6 million is for the Niagara region, includes regional work such as roads, regional roads, regional transit, waste management, police, and so on. And then as well, the provincial component of $8.7 million, which is for education, which funds the Ontario school system. A reminder just of the overview of how taxes are calculated. The tax needs of the municipality are divided by the total weighted assessment provided by MPAC to come up with a tax rate. So then property owners apply that tax rate to their own property assessment to come up with their annualized tax bill. For comparisons, we annually update some of the key comparisons that are available for Ontario amongst the 105 municipalities. The key measure is relative tax burden for detached bungalow in our area. So for 2018 or 17 in the 2018 study, the Fort Erie total taxes of $3,253 for compares as below the average in the study group for Niagara of $3,518. In the other tax classes, Fort Erie is also below the average in areas such as the two-story commercial and large industrial classes. This graph on slide 8 shows Fort Erie's relative position with that comparison group. So you can see Fort Erie is the second lowest, the only lower being Thorold in the Niagara area. Building on that last graph is a comparison of Fort Erie with the rest of Niagara for the total municipal burden. So this adds to the tax component of the last slide, the comparison for the water and wastewater, or the utility component. It does exclude a couple municipalities that were on the previous slide, that being Grimsby, which information wasn't available, as well as Waynfleet, which doesn't have a utility or a water wastewater system. As mentioned in the water and wastewater presentation, Fort Erie, relatively speaking, has higher utility costs and lower taxes, as you could see on the last slide. And in this case, with the total municipal burden, Fort Erie is 2.8% above the Niagara average. So I won't spend too much time on the existing corporate strategic plan that was approved in 2015. It will be replaced in the coming weeks, of course. Some highlights, though, just from the last year, based on that strategic plan, include some key components on this slide for a prosperous and growing community pillar, effective, sustainable infrastructure, and you can come back to these details later if you wish, but in interest of time, I'll just skim over these, as well as initiatives under a strong customer service, relationships, and communications pillar. So in terms of background from 2018 as well, for financial performance, although we're awaiting final review of some numbers and audit confirmation in May, the year did result in surpluses both for the water and wastewater component and for the levy operations, due to a number of factors that were either one-time in nature or items that are being addressed in this year's budget. Certain allocations from that, which will be brought forward in the summer following the audit, are mandated allocations that are required either by policy or through legislation. Grant Thornton, our auditors, will be here in the next couple months to audit, and those statements will be reviewed by the audit committee and adopted in June. The annual report in July is where any proposed surplus allocations will come forward. So for some key financial balances projected to open 2019 that are of interest for the budget are opening total levy debt of 4.1 million, or 7.4 million if you include all the water and wastewater debt. 5.7 million in levy reserves that are operating in nature. So those would include things like emergency management, the South Niagara Hospital contributions, the existing theater contributions, as well as levy stabilization. And then levy reserves for capital of just over $10 million for areas such as road resurfacing, fleet and facilities, and so on. So then moving to 2019, the base budget includes revenues and expenses approved in previous budgets and costs that are part of ongoing operations. The drivers are the cost to deliver services currently provided and expected to continue. Asset maintenance, so the capital budget does approve funding for asset replacement or betterment, but the operating budget does provide funding for ongoing costs of asset maintenance. Overall, as well, administrative costs or overhead costs, which reduce or are netted against other non-taxed revenues, and the remaining balance is the tax levy that is borne by the taxpayers. Overall, the base budget change for 2019 is a 1.33% decrease, which is a 0.96% increase over last year, less the assessment growth, which we'll speak about in a moment. In Report CBC 07, Appendix 1 provides a highlight and listing of all those changes for the base budget over 2018. Appendix 3 provides the consolidated reporting for revenues expenses for the various amounts. Departmental reports are included in tab 7 of your binder and include columns for prior year-to-date actuals and budget amounts approved, as well as the 19 proposed budget in 2020 and 2021 forecasts. The revenue categories, some of them are listed there, including the tax and the BIA levies, PILs, which are payments in lieu from other governmental organizations, donations, fines, interest and penalties, and so on. Expense categories include wages and benefits, materials and services, debt, interest and debt payments, grants, and partnership programs. As well, at the bottom of each page, there's a financing and transfer section, which is for internal cost allocations to and from reserves, as well as the debt principal portion. So for 2019, the increase in revenues for the base budget is $833,538. Just some highlights from those. Provincial impacts include the one thing that we had been waiting on until recently was information regarding the Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund, or OMPF, which the province has given assurances that it will be virtually the same for 19, and that remains then at approximately $1.5 million that we get through the Assessment Equalization Grant. Again, there's the new recent program for cannabis legalization implementation, which the town has been announced as receiving $44,000, and annual contributions through the provincial gas tax funds for transit, which has a small increase for this year. One of the larger increases for 2019 is the interest and penalties component of $480,000. This is related to the town's interest rates more than doubling over the last 18 months, and an increase in the town's volumes related to that. Building and planning fee revenue is increasing approximately $79,000. Tax revenue has an increase of $70,000 for supplemental taxes we received during the year, net of transfers, and a $29,000 decrease from a phasing out of vacancy rebates. All other non-tax revenues are an increase of $129,000. It includes things such as user fees, cell towers, and gaming revenues. This is a breakdown of all revenue by source, so the largest one being tax levy of 82%, followed by others such as user fees, grants, interest and penalties, and so on. Base budget increases in expenses are $1.15 million. The largest component of the base expenses is wages and benefits, which has an increase of $323,000, and that includes all union, non-union firefighters, mayor and council and committee amounts. The capital reserve contributions have an increase of $162,000, which matches the CPI rate that we referenced in December. That allows us to hold the line on inflationary demands of our capital program. The operating impacts from the capital budget are included here as well. Those are incremental wages, materials and supplies, as well as reserve contributions for new assets to capture the life cycle needs of any new assets. The Crystal Ridge Community Center, the lease was renegotiated in the summer of 2018, and the budget includes $97,000 for that related to long-term needs under the agreement, as well as changes related to wages and maintenance costs. A few other expense changes. The town did procure insurance services, and with the change this year, we're able to reflect a $46,000 decrease in those costs year over year. The multi-year phase-ins for 2017 and 18 supplementary amounts included transit van costs of $12,500, snow clearing costs of $180,000, and $52,000 in phased-in wage amounts. Grants overall have a slight decrease, which include the increases to the EDTC and library that were presented February 20th. And all other expenses have an increase of $222,000, which includes materials, supplies, fuel, street lighting, utilities, net of any funding changes. The base budget, the last line there, the decrease of $65,000, is to adjust or to remove one-time items that were not funded by reserves in the prior budget. So again, similar to the revenues by type, this is expenses by type. The largest expense, as I mentioned, being wages and benefits, representing 40% of the budget, followed by materials and supplies, reserve transfers, grants, and debt costs. Assessment changes are reported in two ways. The first is assessment growth. This component is the annual benefit that taxpayers get from new development in the town, so new taxpayers helping to carry the burden of the levy. For 2019, the total growth is 2.29%, which is always a welcome reduction for existing taxpayers, and this is the largest in a number of years that the town has had, and larger than average. The reassessment shifts, the second main point there, do not affect the budget, but affect how the budget is distributed across the town's property classes. This is a result of MPAC's reassessments and changes. In particular, the changes are most the largest in a reassessment year, which was last done in for the tax year 2017. And the average residential phase-in for these reassessment shifts is 2.3% increase. So similar to the 2.29, that's just coincidental that those are very close in nature there. This slide just is to give users the sense that when it comes to what we present for the total changes and impacts to the budget, we're presenting for that average increase for phase-in. So if as a property owner, your assessment increases less than the town average of 2.3%, your taxes will increase less than that's presented tonight. Or conversely, if it's more than the 2.3, your taxes will increase more than that presented. And the reassessment shift this year in terms of the difference, what you see between what the town's levy is actually increasing and what it is for the median household. The shift is just a very small 0.05% increase for residential median households. This chart summarizes all those base changes, so a base summary, whereby the three components, the revenue, expense, and the one-time items, result in a total levy impact of $254,000 or 0.96%. And when that assessment growth from the previous slide is captured, it's a net decrease of 1.33%. So here, first of all, for the median household, increasing at the 2.3%. The total tax bill, so in the town, the region, and the education total, this is as presented in the report, was increasing a total of 1.19%. Subsequent to the report being released, the region did pass their budget on Thursday, which resulted in some changes. So the report was based, as you can see at the bottom in the footnote, on the initial 5.8% proposed budget. When that's adjusted for tonight to the approved budget after that was released with the 3.8% regional budget, the total increase for base for the town's base amounts and all others is 0.49% increase. The footnote does also say that it excludes any tax policy changes, which at this point we're not expecting to be large. They're usually more minor in nature. And as well, the education component has been included with the existing provincial tax rates. Usually by now we hope to have received those, but we're still waiting on the province's education rates. So for now, you can see the 2.3% is the same as the assessment increase because we're using the existing rates. So that wraps up the base part, and then the supplementary, an overview of that, this is Appendix 2 of the report, which are items submitted for services beyond the base level, and they are one-time, and they include one-time projects and new services. For tonight, we will be considering 16 of those for your consideration, and we break these down into 4 areas. Parts 1 and 2 are items that previously have been or come before council and separated into both base and one-time components. And then parts 3 and 4, again, are base and one-time, but these are for new requests for tonight. So just looking at each part, part 1 is for $521,857 of base costs, which continue into the future. $500,000 request is similar to previous requests council has seen in the past for addressing the infrastructure gap and long-term strategic needs. $6,857 for short-term rental education campaign, and $15,000 for Communities in Bloom event planning student. Part 2 is $832,000. These are all proposed with reserve funding that the town has. $400,000 is again similar to previous years. It reflects the town's effort to deal with the devastation from emerald ash borer tree loss, and so that's for cost to remove trees, and that's proposed to be funded with emergency management reserve funding. In particular, that was funded with last year's surplus funds. So an example of where surplus funds are used to help defray increases in the following year. $50,000 for an affordable housing needs assessment study follows the presentation on February 11th and is proposed with reserve funding, as is the $20,000 request for Ridgeway Manor Stage 3 archaeological assessment. And then finally, from the Fort Erie Public Library request for assistance of their capital project of $337,000 for their renovations at the Centennial Branch. And the final one under Part 2 is the request that Council received on February 25th from the Crystal Ridge Community Center for a grant of $25,000 and proposed with funding from reserves as well. Parts 3 is base components of new items. The first 4 of these relate to staffing, a GIS or a Geographical Information System coordinator, fire administrative clerk, development coordinator, and asset management coordinator. $60,000 for a stormwater management facility sediment cleanout. $85,000 for a rural ditching program. And then lastly, Part 4, which is one-time costs, $200,000 for a rural ditching master plan funded by the Rate Stabilization Reserve, and $40,000 for a Crystal Beach secondary plan parking study. So if all of these items total $906,000, net of funding with an impact to the levy of 3.42%. So when that's combined with the total base changes, it would be a total levy change of 2.09%. This is at the bottom of Appendix 2 in Column 2. To show you some levy history of the previous 5 years, this graph shows the components both for the town taxes in the blue as well as the total tax bill in orange. And you can see the lightly shaded 2019 bars show just the base impacts, and then the solid 2019 at the far left are the total impacts of the previous slide. So the dark orange bar shows the tentative total tax increase of 2.03%. And it's important to note with all of these that this does include all the strategic capital infrastructure increases over the last number of years, which have averaged around 2%. So if you were to want to extrapolate from there, the increases without that, it would be approximately 2% less per year. So the total tax bill, again, increase for the median household is 2.03%. When shown alternatively for every $100,000 in assessment, the percentage, of course, still remains the same, but you can see that the total tax bill of for the town, region, and education portions of $1,486, or for the median household, $2,911. Here again, just this shows the flow through of all those changes, both for the $100,000 assessment, which can be used easily to extrapolate to other amounts of assessment, as well as the median household. So the total change for the $100,000 assessment is $14 to arrive at the $683, or $27 per year for the median household. Risks and opportunities. Some of the risks, annually we discuss some of the federal and provincial legislation issues. A lot of their policy or budget changes do impact the town, as was particularly noted this year with the OMPF announcement that we were waiting for, as well as additional regulations. Some of the items included this year are in response to asset management requirements of the province under some Ontario regulations. The assessment base is subject to ongoing changes, and particularly the town has been affected in the past from larger commercial and industrial appeals, so that is a risk for the levy budget. Regional taxes, the budget does include the region's levy changes. As I mentioned, some of the changes are still outstanding related to policy, but they're not expected to be major. The Emerald Ash Borer, of course, we have been reviewing and tracking through staff reports over the last number of years, and there is some hope that we're coming to the end of some of that, the harder lifting or heavier lifting with those requirements. economic factors that we've already noted. On the risk side, it would be the debt carrying costs that have an upward pressure. But certainly with us in this year, we are benefiting from the interest rate increases that are occurring. As well, there are inflation and utility pressures. Legal matters are always important to note in terms of exposure the town does face beyond our insurance premium coverage. And as we've often said, the infrastructure gap and the pressures there for replacing and rehabilitating our existing capital. Similarly, with the other levels of government, with federal and provincial governments, we're always mindful of any funding opportunities that may come our way. So that is a key opportunity in any budget, and we're always bringing those forward as we can and applying for as many of those as we're eligible or able to. And the grants oversight team monitors those opportunities. The fees and charges, annually we do, of course, review those, and those came forward back in January. That's always an opportunity to ensure that the balance or the burden is balanced between users of fees and the tax levy. There's an opportunity for us to manage assessment growth and to ensure that we have a healthy mix of residential, industrial, and commercial taxes. As noted earlier as well, the theater cost that the town has savings for, those costs are undetermined at this point in terms of what the final amounts will be. So there is an opportunity there for any savings through the fundraising efforts for those funds to be directed elsewhere. Some notes on the forecasting. The forecasted base increase is 1.2% for 2020 and 2.1% for 2021. The strategic capital reserve contributions should continue in terms of forecasting efforts to mitigate the impacts of Ontario requirements for the infrastructure needs. The current collective bargaining agreement expires at the end of 2020. The preparation inputs for the 2020 budget process will be ongoing through 2019 and will be advanced earlier than this budget due to it being a non-election year. So tonight we'll be looking at two components, both the CBC 06 report regarding assessment analysis and CBC 07, which contains the recommendations for the changes. Staff have scheduled March 20th as a follow-up budget meeting if council wishes to have more opportunity to examine changes and the requests. The bylaws related to both the operating and the capital budgets are scheduled to be brought forward to council March 25th, or if we need more time, alternatively April 8th. And as always, with any of those, staff welcome anyone from the public or council to make inquiries and ask questions regarding the budget. Some of those other dates in the budget process include regional approvals of policy and ratios, our own rate bylaws, the tax rate bylaws, which get consolidated and approved by bylaw in May, and then the final tax bills for 2019 are mailed out in June. So following the presentation, we'll be looking at the supplementary items that are separately recommended. These 8 parts listed on this slide are all part of the CBC 07 report. And for example, part 6, the BIA levies, they require their levies to be updated or approved separately, as well as all the individual supplementary items. That concludes my presentation, and I turn the floor back to the chair for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Do you have any questions around the table with regards to Mr. Jansen's report? Councillor Noyes.
are we going to be going through each section, like each section, like A, B, part one, all that? Are we going to look at them each individually?
What we're planning on doing is going through each part and separately. And if you want to pull something out of that part for discussion, we'll be doing that.
Thank you. Then most of my questions can wait until that item comes up. My question right now is in regards to the average dollar amount. I guess the house value, I think, was 191,000 or one. Again, does that not seem a bit low in regards to the housing prices that we're now seeing, or is that just?
Mr. Jansen?
Yes, through you, Chair, to Councillor Noyes. The median household that the town has used for many years is the property code that MPAC uses for a single detached home not on water. So it is something that wouldn't be the average assessment, but it does represent for the most common type of housing or the median household. So it's 195,900 for 2019.
And my understanding in that so if you want to value your house is valued at 500,000, what you would do is for every 100,000, the increase is $14 per 100,000. Correct? Thank you.
Your Worship?
Just on that point, people's homes may be worth more than what they're assessed at. We never hear about people appealing that, but they'll appeal it if it's overassessed. So these are based purely on the MPAC figures, and those are the figures that you should utilize. I just had a couple of questions, Chair. The first one had to do with the page 9, which outlines the comparison of the municipal burden, taxes, and utilities. And that's an interesting graph, and it does show Fort Erie above the average. I wonder if Mr. Jansen can get that back up on the screen so people are seeing that instead of me. And I had a chance to chat with Mr. Jansen about this. This does not reflect the condition or the state of the underground infrastructure, which would have a reflection on the utility charges. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that, do we have any mechanisms that would indicate the comparative condition of the infrastructure, the water and wastewater infrastructure from municipality to municipality?
Through the chair to Mayor, there are some provincial metrics that would show the asset consumption values, so that would be one way of showing the age of assets that the towns have.
What does asset consumption value mean?
Jansen?
It shows the trying to think of the calculation off the top of my head, but it would show the rate at which assets are being used if they're in their useful life. So it would a municipality with newer assets would proportionately have higher asset values than the amortization rate of how they're being used up annually. So that ratio just shows really ultimately the age of assets on average for the municipality.
Right, and if I might, and would that also indicate the extent of the underground infrastructure in a municipality?
No, it wouldn't. If you're talking in terms of quantity, there are some metrics in our annual financial information return reporting that used to capture that, but I think we would have to dig deeper to find some of that. I think as more asset management plans come online with more details, that type of information might be easier to find as well.
I'd be interested in, I think all the councillors would be interested in seeing what our comparison is with respect to these other municipalities, because we frequently get calls or messages, or we see people and they're very concerned about the water and wastewater bill. To some extent, we've got some standard comments with respect to that, particularly if they're comparing us to Mississauga or some of the larger cities that they've come from. But, and of course, those municipalities have much greater intensification of utilization of those underground services. But it would also be helpful if we knew where we stand, because we believe that we're putting a fair bit of money into our infrastructure, and we know that some municipalities are not. So it would be helpful if we could at least have that as a comparison, so when people say, well, my friend lives in so-and-so in Niagara, and they're only paying whatever. Not that it's going to affect this budget, but I think that would be helpful information for us to have if it's not a great deal of work to pull out. The other question that I had, on page 37, there's a reference to risks, and there's a mention of assessment appeals. Do we have any large outstanding appeals right now?
Through the chair to Mayor Redekop, the town has been progressively coming down in terms of total amounts outstanding, which is often an indicator of appeals. But I know that with the reassessment cycle, the appeal, the number of appeals and the amount of appeals tends to be larger in the earlier years. So it has been coming down over recent years, and our penalties and write-offs of taxes in the budget has been reduced in terms of reflecting the fact that our appeals have been coming down.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I wanted to thank Mr. Jansen and all of the senior staff, and really all of the people who were involved in providing inputs into this budget. This is an excellent budget, I think, at this particular time, including the fact that we're going to be also putting money into infrastructure again, as we've done over the past several years. I think a tax increase of just over 2% when you factor in the region's 3.8% increase is pretty remarkable. So I want to congratulate our staff on the hard work that they've done. Can I also make a declaration of a pecuniary interest, which I forgot about? In Part 2 of report CBC 07-2019, 2.3 relates to Ridgewood Manor. 2.5 relates to Crystal Ridge Community Center. I should be declaring a conflict with respect to each of those because the Ridgeway Lions Club, of which I'm a member, is very involved in both of those facilities. So when we deal with those, separately when we get to that part?
Yes, Your Worship. I believe Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question through you to Mr. Jansen. On slide 37, and I guess further to what the mayor had mentioned about the infrastructure, regarding the infrastructure, you're showing as risk or opportunity, and under, I'm assuming risk is the infrastructure gap. Considering what we've been contributing to bridge this gap, I'm just curious, in addition to what other municipalities are doing, but what can we do to no longer have this as a risk? I mean, I know we're all very focused on additional funding, but each year it seems to be shown as a risk.
Mr. Jansen?
Through you, Chair to Councillor Zanko. You're quite right. I think in some ways we should be lessening this as a notation. We've made remarkable progress in this regard. As additional master plans, or more importantly this year, the asset management plan comes through, we will have a better indication of what that truly is. So I think this year in particular is, next year at this time, we will know much better what the realities of that gap is with the asset management plan we have, which is coming forward in the next few months. So you're right, it's something we should be celebrating, that we've made some good progress, but until we know more of what that asset management plan says, we're hesitant to we would like to continue to note it as a risk.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. And I also have a pecuniary interest with regard to Part 3, Section 3.5, the stormwater management facility clean out for Bryan Street. I have a conflict. I live on Bryan Street.
Thank you. Any further questions?
Is that the alarm to wake up Mr. Brady?
Okay, so we'll move to reports. Could I get a motion on the floor for CBC 06, 2019, the analysis of the 2018 assessment for the 2019 taxation year? The council receives report CBC 06, 2019 regarding to the analysis of the 2018 for the 2019 taxation year for information purposes. Thank you, Your Worship. Any comments or questions? Okay, moving on.
On it? Gonna vote on it?
Oh, I think that might be a good idea. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried.
You in a hurry?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's been a long day already. So we're going to move to part one. Does anybody want anything pulled from this for discussion?
So we need to put the vote on.
Oh, yeah. Motion? Motion by,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move that each part is dealt with separately.
thank you.
And,
Worship?
Chair, can we also deal with Part 2, items 2.3 and 2.5, and Part 3, items 3.5 separate?
I have those marked. Councilor Noyes?
So Councillor Zanko just moved that Part 1, each part be treated separately, or I would think, I would then ask that all those in 2.2 be separated. And I guess 2.5 is already being separated. We're doing Part 3 too?
Deal with them all separately. Let's just go through the list.
Okay, so 2.2 is what you want?
I think we're going to all separate it to each line.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
Makes sense.
Councilor Zanko?
I can make a change and move that we move each section separately.
Okay. Perfect. All in favor? Carry. So we're moving on to part one. So 1.1 is $500,000 for capital reserve strategic investment. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. 1.2, 6857 for short-term rental education campaign. Comments or questions? Councilor Noyes.
And I do realize it's a very small amount, and I do know that the majority of the cost for that is going into the postcards. I think that's the lion's share of that $6,857. And I'm just wondering, can cost savings be found as opposed? I may have to make assumptions here because we didn't get the breakdown of that. If a lot of that has to do with mailing the postcards, I'm hoping that they could be put in a bill that we send every month already, as opposed to doing it separately. Maybe there could be some cost savings there. But I will be approving, and I'm just hoping that.
Mr. Jansen, can you answer that question? Rick?
Well, if there was any savings, they would be going out in the tax bills. So I'm not certain that, or the water bill, if the finance department would be willing to do that, then we could.
Mr. Jansen?
Yeah, that is an option. I'm not as familiar with how targeted this might be. As well, I know our experience has been that items included in the water and tax bill are not necessarily valued or readily seen by some, depending on how you process those bills. So that would just be a consideration I would add.
Councilor Noyes?
And I would assume that all those people, or the majority of people that are involved in short-term rentals that have an interest in that, probably would be keeping their eyes open in regards to the website and things and how they can get that information, because I'm sure it'll also be on our website for them to go to. I would just, would have a problem seeing, $3,000 being spent on mailing things out to people. That's all.
Thank you. All in favor? Or Councilor Butler, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just thinking about the info postcard. I think it's not a bad idea to have the postcards sent out by mail. I think if you break it down, just out of experience myself, the postage to do a neighborhood mail would run around roughly $1,900. The balance, I would think, is eaten up by the cost of putting the postcard together itself. And I think if you're going to look at where you can slim it down, it would probably be in that area there, but I don't think that you would have much of a cost savings. I'm going to support this evening because I think it's really imperative that everybody does get this information, and that's my thought on it.
All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Go to 1.3, which is $15,000 for Communities in Bloom event planning student. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. So we'll move to part 2.1. Need a motion? Thank you.
Remove the whole report. I think the whole report was moved, and I believe then there was a motion to separate all of the items. Don't have that?
Okay. So we're moving to 2.1, which is $400,000 for the Emerald Ash Borer tree removal funded by the Emergency Management Reserve. Your Worship?
Just a question, where are we now in terms of the removal of ash, dead ash trees, and this multi-year program?
Mr. Walsh?
Through you, Mr. Chair, thankfully we're getting close to the end. Mr. Hutton figures another year of this, and by then maybe cutting it down to half that amount the year after, and that should be the end of it because the trees will either have been removed or snapped off themselves.
And then just to follow that up, we had been putting money into tree replacement. That's part of the capital budget.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have, it's part of our operating budget. It's in here.
So we're not changing that at all? Be the same as from last year, Mr. Chair?
That's correct.
Okay. So when we get to, we'll be dealing with some surplus funds from 2018 at some point. We may want to consider that. I think we had a very good program last year when we had some trees for free, and that was really a good take-up.
Any further questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. So we'll move to 2.2, $50,000 for Affordable Housing Committee and Needs Assessment funded by the General Levy Rate Stabilization Reserve. Comments or questions? Councilor Noyes.
Thank you. I'm in support of this because I think affordable housing is very important, and I did have a chance a while ago to talk to Councillor Butler about it, but I do hope that the assessment, before we go starting the assessment, that there's some collaboration with the region to determine the parameters of the assessment, because if there's not a meeting of the minds before this assessment starts on what the region will be considering added value or necessary stats for them to then allocate more money to Fort Erie, we're going to be spending money that's not going to be as well spent as it possibly could be. So I think that the region, that when we start this assessment, you have to include some collaboration with the region.
Agreed. Any other questions or comments? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. So we'll move to 2.3, which is $20,000 for Ridgeway Manor Stage 3 Archaeological Assessment funded by the GRS Reserve. Comments or questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. 2.4 is the $337,460 for Fort Erie Public Library Centennial Branch renovations funded by the Facilities Maintenance Reserve. Your Worship?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This 337, I support this renovation project. This $337,000 figure, that's not net of the $25,000 surplus from the 2018 library budget, is it? So when the library people were here, I asked them specifically about that surplus. You recall that they had about $75,000, 50 of which they wanted to put into an operating reserve fund, which I'm fine with. 25, they indicated they could allocate to this particular project. So I'd like to move that we reduce the $337,460 by $25,000. And the library CAO said that they would be agreeable to that. At least that's what I heard. I hope the rest of you heard the same thing.
Councilor Noyes? Okay. Councilor Duvenel?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not in opposition to doing that. I just think with the great work that the library does in the community, I would be okay letting them keep that $25,000 to use for programming in the community. You know, going to the capital upgrade that they're requesting, I don't think they've made a request like this in quite some time. And, you know, you just see the work they do in the community for the children and for, you know, seniors and people of all ages. If they could use that $25 or $25,000 for programming and to enhance library services, I'd be okay with letting them keep that. But, you know, certainly if we want to have a discussion about that and we feel it would be beneficial to claw that back, I'm open to it. I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Worship?
Yeah, just to comment on that, this goes back a few years, and they've had some surplus because they've had a vacant position for a number of years, and I don't disagree that they've got lots of needs and that they run an excellent operation, and they serve probably more people in the community than anything else that we do other than the roads and the water and wastewater. I specifically asked the CAO about this because I didn't want to shortchange them. But they did have, as I said, a $75,000 surplus, 50 of which they're going to be keeping in their operating reserve. Last year, I mean, if they have any difficulties with capital needs, we have worked with them in the past, and we did last year as an example. They still have some other capital projects that they want to work on, and they'll be utilizing the balance of their capital funds then. But so I wouldn't have asked them for this. I don't know that there's a bigger supporter of the library in town than me, and I certainly wouldn't want to hold them short, and they do an excellent job. But I think that based on what the CAO told me, that we can allocate that $25,000 to this.
Councilor Lubitz?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Taking a look at what the library does for our community, and I mean, they work just as hard as anybody else to cut back on some of their expenses. So when they develop a reserve fund, right, I don't know that we should be penalizing them for doing a good job and then taking $25,000 out of their budget. Looking at the total budget that Mr. Jansen explained to us, the $25,000 is not going to change anything drastically, and I'm not going to support taking anything away from the library, so I won't be supporting that.
Mr. Jansen?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Just to clarify, we have proposed this amount with reserve funding, so there is no levy impact to a change of this amount other than use of our reserves.
Mr. Chair, just more importantly, this doesn't affect the library's operating budget because we're going to be dealing with that in 5.7. So we're going to be presumably funding their request for their operating. This doesn't have any impact.
That's correct. So,
Can I comment?
certainly.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mayor Redicott. But you're right, I was at the meeting as well when you asked the library board if they could do without the 25,000. But we didn't ask them if they agreed with it. And I'm sure that our library's Schufeld, Mr. Schufeld, I'm sure that he realized, yeah, we could do without, but I would think that he would prefer that they not do without. And that's a question that was never asked. So again, this is not the first time that we've gone to the library board and taking away from their budget. And I don't think that we need to nickel and dime them down on their budget, and I'm not going to support reducing it.
Okay, so we'll move on the mayor's motion first. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Opposed? Carried. So we'll move to 2.5, which is $25,000 for Crystal Ridge Community Center Grant Fund, funded by the GLRS Reserve. Comments or questions? Councilman Noyes.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. Again, first I want to say that I think it's an absolutely wonderful organization. They do tremendous fundraising, and I have many friends on that board. However, I do see that staff do not support this request. And I also, in the presentation that Mr. Feiertag did when he came, and again, there was a lot covered that night, and I wished that we would have had a copy of the budget. And I know that I talked to Mr. Jansen earlier today because, and I did ask Mr. Feiertag a question, but I think I may have caught him off guard because I asked him about the 33, I think he mentioned that there was a $33,000 expense. Like he was going through all the expenses, and one that jumped out at me was, I think it was $33,000. I asked him what that was referring to, the cost, and he referred to it as something about kitchen staff or something to do with weddings, and I'm thinking, I'm not quite sure what that $33,000 was. If it has to do towards kitchen staff who are working at weddings or anything to do with weddings or any event like that, they should be self-sustaining. We shouldn't be subsidizing the wedding. And I don't know if anybody's had a chance for any clarification. I know I talked to Mr. Jansen today. He was going to check with the CEO to see if we didn't have a copy of their budget. So I could maybe be clear on where this some of their expenses went to. And I'd also like to hear from Mr. Jansen about why the staff aren't in full support of this.
Mr. Cookett.
Through you, Chair, to the councillor. Just to give some background on the situation, Councillor Noyes, you weren't here in 2018, but we renewed their lease agreement with CRCC, and at that time, through the negotiations, there was many requests from them and costs that they requested that we pick up over the next term of that lease, which was 20 years. Those costs equated to $1.7 million of capital improvements, which they wanted us to pick up, and we did agree to it. And one of the requests also that they had made was for $20,000 annually for operating costs, which we did not agree to and said we would not include that into the new lease agreement. And we suggested to them if they still felt that they required that operating money, that they come back at budget time and make that request. But our staff do not support that. We felt that picking up the $1.7 million over the next 20 years in capital improvements would leave them with money that they could operate.
Any further questions, Councilor Noyes, before I move on?
Again, and I don't know if we're going to get an answer tonight. Again, it was that one that stuck out at me was I think it was $33,000 for for kitchen staff or something like that, and I wish we could get a clarification, but I won't be supporting this based on the CAO's explanation of the how he explained it. The 1.7 million, anyway.
Councillor Dupin.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just through you to staff, I'm just going to read a portion of the supplementary budget request. It mentions that CRCC to explore and implement ways to generate additional revenues and operating cost reductions. Town staff will assist with this. I'm just wondering, has anyone from CRCC actually reached out to town staff to actually follow through with this recommendation?
Mr. Cookett?
Through you, Chair, to the councillor, I'm not aware of them reaching out to us. They would have reached out to Mr. Hutton, and I'm not aware of any communication with him.
Anything further? Anyone else? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Okay, we'll move on to part 3. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that that was defeated.
You're just checking to see if we're paying attention.
Yeah, I was. That council approves the following supplementary base budget new funding request. 3.1, $69,825 for GIS coordinator wages and benefits. Any comments or questions? Councillor Noyes.
I'm probably going to be somewhat out of order because I'm looking at all these 4 positions. So I don't want to comment on each one of them or wait to the end. But I did want to comment that since 2016, this has been an 11.5 increase in the staff complement since 2016. I do realize there's been increased demands from the government, from upper levels of government that are requesting more and more information and more data and statistical analysis, et cetera, et cetera. So I will be supporting all of them, but I do want to mention and just that it is 11.5 more employees that we have had since 2016.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. Anybody else? Your worship.
Yeah, I went over this budget with both Mr. Jansen and Mr. Cookett, and this area with respect to the new employees was something that caught me because I'm not a big booster of bringing on more people if it's not necessary, but we had a pretty good explanation of the need for all 4 of these new positions, and the reality is that it is a growing community. The assessment growth that we had is pretty significant, and all you have to do is drive around here and see what's been happening. That does put pressure on some of these areas in terms of assistance needed. And so the asset management coordinator, as an example, I would expect will actually assist us in finding savings in terms of managing our assets on a day-to-day basis, but also helping us to find ways that we can extend the life of assets. So those are the types of investments that we make and will, I think, in the long term pay off. The reality is that we have hired more people, but we've had to hire more people. Planning and Building Department, as an example, has had tremendous work that they've been doing because of all the construction that's been going on over the past several years, so that we're able to do this and still maintain, if all of these things are passed, still maintain a budget at just over 2%, which I think is quite commendable to the staff. So I feel your anxiety, Councillor Noyes, but seems to me that these positions, along with the other staff that we have, are going to well serve the community.
Anyone else? So we're dealing with 3.1 for GIS coordinator wages and benefits. All in favor? Mr. Penny? Carried. 3.2, $47,395 for fire administrator clerk wages and benefits. Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Councilor McNair, but I do want to commend the fire chief in regards to, even though this is an increase in the staffing level, that there was actually some efficiencies found somewhere else, so it's not like a full position. My understanding, reading the information, some duties are being transferred so that it's, he can better explain it, I'm sure, than me, but it's, but it was nice to see that there was some savings found in one way to put towards here, so it's not like a full-time employee because another position kind of went down. I'm not making myself clear, but.
Anybody else? All in favor? Carried. 3.3, $67,875 for development coordinator wages and benefits. Comments or questions? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. 3.4, $54,430 for asset management coordinator wages and benefits. Comments, questions? All in favor? Carried. 3.5, $60,000 for stormwater management facility sediment cleanout. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. And 3.6, $85,000 for rural ditching program. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. We'll move to part 4. The council approves the following supplementary one-time new funding request for 2019. 4.1 is $200,000 for rural ditching master plan funded by the GLRS reserve. Mayor Redicott.
I think this is extremely important. For all of us who travel through the rural areas, you'll know that some of the ditching is extremely important. It would be very helpful if we had some indication of where we should be going, what the priorities should be, and make sure that we have adequate drainage and safe rural roads, because some of these ditches are full of trees. So it makes it more exciting when you're driving through the rural areas. But I don't know that people want excitement. Yeah. I support this.
Councillor Noyes?
I'm also in support of this, and I am hoping also, and I had a chance a few weeks ago to talk to Mr. Welsh about some of the culverts that I see, again, living in the rural area, particularly Ward 6. I think we have probably the largest number of culverts that really are pretty much illegal because there's no culvert in there. They're just kind of filling in the ditch and making a driveway and things like that. And I'm hoping that part of this master plan is some education to those individuals that, you know, if you're going to put a driveway in, please put the culvert in and don't just, you know, close off the ditch, because you can see it a lot when you're driving along that there's water stops on one side and then there's a ton of water on the other. It's simply because the culvert or the driveway between where the water is and the water isn't, there just isn't any way for the water to drain. And that's become, I think, a major problem in the rural areas.
Councillor Dubina.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also fully in support of this. When I first saw the number, $200,000, it kind of jumped out at me, and I was wondering, you know, why is this, you know, relatively so expensive? But after speaking with staff and seeing what is actually, you know, involved, the documentation and the full connection of all the ditches around the community, to touch on what Councillor Noyes had just mentioned about how, you know, you'll have one side of a ditch that is filled with water and another part that it doesn't have water. This master plan will allow all those areas to be addressed as one single system, so that you aren't doing work in one area and affecting another area without having, you know, necessarily the connection between the two. And in the long-term ramifications of that is that it could save us money because we aren't doing works continually, you know, on top of each other to rectify issues as they come up. So I'm fully in support of this. I think it's a great idea, and I'm glad we're doing it.
Anyone else? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. 4.2, $40,000 for Crystal Beach Secondary Plan Parking Study funded by the GLRS Reserve. Councilor Noyes.
Yes, Councilor McDermott, I'm just wondering, was there a prior parking study done for Crystal Beach?
Mr. Brady?
12 years ago?
Through to the council, yes, there was a study done at that time. We've looked at it. It needs, the issues in Crystal Beach continue to be there. From a parking perspective, there's really three kinds of issues. One is the heavy-duty summer weekend parking issue. The other is the parking associated with the commercial downtown. And the one that's the emerging issue is, as we are doing residential intensification in Crystal Beach and continuing to do so, the parking that is needed to facilitate that. So we'll look at all three of those issues.
Thank you for that explanation. I do hope that that study that has been done will be reviewed, and any merits that can be moved forward. Or I know there was a lot of discussion in certain areas and certain roads, the pros and cons and things like that, that be taken into consideration as opposed to starting, from square one again.
Any others? All in favor? Carried. We'll move to Part 5. The council approves following grants for 2019. 5.1, $24,250 for Port Erie Lions Seniors Citizens Complex. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. 5.2 is $28,000 for business area watering. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. 5.3, $19,235 for Beachcombers Senior Complex. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. 5.5 is $41,550 for community events. I'm sorry. 5.4, $1,000 for Port Erie Horticultural Society. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. We'll try 5.5 again. $41,550 for community events. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so before we go to 5.6, I just want to remind everyone of our termination of the MOU and our contractual obligation to do the 2018 funding. So that being said, comments or questions? Councilor Noyes.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. It pays to sit right across from you, doesn't it? You see my hand first. Does this amount reflect the 2.2, I think, percentage increase?
The amount brought forward, they asked for 2% more. But hang on a second. The 2018 funding, which what we're obligated to do, is $665,047. That's not what mine says, but nevertheless. And they had $14,000 on top of that. That would be 2%.
Okay. I'm not in favor of giving them the additional 2%. I think that should be subtracted from the amount. We're not under the memorandum of agreement. We are not. We don't have to do that. We just have to match last year's funding. And I also wonder whether the fee that we're going to be paying the consultant to review the EDTC, how it's set up in that, could that not also be an expense to the EDTC?
Your Worship, you're working on that part, aren't you?
Well, I am. I mean, it's pretty clear to me. If they got $665,044 for programming last year, that's what they should get this year. No more, no less. Otherwise, we can't legitimately say that we consider this to be the termination year. So I don't think, because there was no review of economic development services last year that was part of their budget, I don't think we can put that in their expenses and consider us meeting our obligation under the MOA, which says same funding as the last year.
In response to that, I think anything we can put towards the EDTC to lower their budget with expenses that we're going to have to pay because of the EDTC should be done. One of the things that they're not doing this year, for instance, is the marketing. What I brought up yesterday in regards to the Fort Erie Live Consortium racing this, whatever you want to call it, that they're not doing this year. So that's a saving of $25,000 right there that they contributed last year to that fund that they're not going to have to contribute this year to that fund. But again, we're obligated to match the funding. I'm really not comfortable with providing over $500,000 to the EDTC without really nailing down each dollar they're going to spend and where they're going to spend it. I think it was very clear when Mr. Gorham came forward and he talked about that he saw these funds as being unrestricted in a lot of ways, and he could move funds around, or the board could move funds around, as they felt necessary. And I do understand that there's new management there, but again, there's 5 board members. 3 board members are the same board members, which means they would have the majority vote to direct the manager to do whatever those 3 particular board members decided was required. I'm not pleased with the performance over the last year and some of the decisions that were made and the decisions that the town was not included in, even though we have members and our board members that sat on the board were not included in, and the board members that did attend obviously were okay with that. And again, they're still the same board members. And my understanding is that the same board members who sit on the EDTC, 3 of them anyway, continue to sit on the Fort Erie Live Consortium.
Point of order, Chair.
What's the point of order?
The relevancy. The relevancy has no bearing here. So I mean, we are looking at a budget. We're talking about a budget. For you to go and talk about members of the board of director being on another board is irrelevant here.
Chair to decide.
Well, I tend to agree. This is pretty simple stuff. I understand that you're not happy with the way the EDTC operates. I've got that, but there's been a history of that. Fact of the matter is, we terminated the agreement with the EDTC. And this is part of that. And just like they have to honor what we're doing, I think we have to honor it whether we like it or not, to be honest with you. So I get what you're saying, but I think that's what we're doing today. This is in the works. I know the mayor's been working hard, and Tom's working hard with the consultant to come up with a better model. And down the line, that's exactly what we're going to get. But in the meantime, we have a contractual obligation to the EDTC to pay them the budget in 2018. This is the agreement, whether we like it or whether we don't. So, carry on. You have the floor.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. I understand what the memorandum of agreement says, that we have to match the fundings, but there's also a service agreement that's attached to that, to saying we can direct some of the services. If the memorandum of agreement does not just say, okay, here's your $600,000+ plus, do with it whatever you will, because, because we've sent you a termination notice, you are therefore, we can't direct you, we can't, it's your money to do with as you please. That's not what I think that the entire agreement reflects. I'm sure that there are places in there that we can nail some costs down. I was much happier with this budget that they provided this year, which had substantially more information than I understand the EDTC has provided in the past, and that's a good thing. But again, I am concerned about the board that made the decisions last year are the same board that's going to make the decisions this year with this additional $600,000. I don't think they spent it well last year, and I'm concerned they're not going to spend it well this year. So I would like to make sure that if there's any way that we can nail down some of the costs and expenses that we agree with, that we do that in any way that we can.
Thank you. Before I go to Councillor Butler and then Councillor Zanko, and the mayor, you had your hand up first, so we're going to go to the mayor first.
Just to deal with some of these things, the MOA does indicate that money that we provide to the EDTC has to be utilized in accordance with the services that we can select. The reality is that we're not economic development experts, and so we have to take some guidance and recommendations from that source, but we can certainly give direction. For example, if we thought that there should be more money spent on tourism, and as a whole we agreed with that, that would be the direction that we would make. The time to pinpoint the EDTC on that type of thing was when they made their presentation. If you've still got ideas that you believe there are certain service areas out of the 7 specified headings that they've identified, then I would urge you to speak to the 2 council board members, because they can then bring those forward. I don't think anybody was completely satisfied with the operation last year. Certainly the things that took place last year have limited the amount of actual money available to be utilized by the EDTC this year. I think the general manager has done the new general manager has done a remarkable job bringing forward changes, identifying areas that needed to be clarified, readjusting expenditures into proper categories, and I think giving us a clearer picture of how she foresees the services being delivered this year by the EDTC. But they have an obligation to provide those services during the course of the year based on what our input is. So I'm going to move, though, Chair, that we allocate this year to the EDTC the sum of $665,044, which the report that we received from staff 3 weeks ago indicated was the base budget that they received, $665,044, as opposed to the $679,678. That then leaves us providing them with the amount of money that they received in 2018, and it indicates our commitment to live up to the terms of the MOA, which we have terminated. So that's my motion.
Thank you. As soon as I get to everybody else. Councillor Butler, Councillor Zanko, Councillor Butler, you're good? Councillor Butler, Councillor Luberts. Councillor Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the sentiments of the mayor, the guy to the left of me. And I understand where Councillor Noyes is coming from, but I appreciate what you said, but I do agree with the mayor. I think we have a contractual obligation, and I do agree that we're heading in the right direction, and that we have a general manager that has some passion behind her and would like to see some changes made, and has made stride in declaring what those changes are going to be to council, and by providing statistical information, financial information to us on a quarterly basis, I think that shows volumes of her intention. So I'm going to be supporting the mayor's motion tonight.
Councilor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I agree that we are only obligated to give the 2018 budget to the EDTC. And if I remember correctly, when, and I don't have the motion in front of me, I wish I did, but the way I interpreted what we were doing was we were giving notice that we were terminating. And we were terminating under the agreement within the EDTC and the MOA. And in the MOA, it's clear that you will get last year's budget. So even if we wanted to give them the 2%, I think as a point of order, we would have to reconsider our original motion of following through with the MOA. So I don't even think we can give them a 2% increase, to be honest with you. Even though they asked for it, they, as much as we have to follow the agreement that you're talking about, they have to follow it as well, as far as I'm concerned. But, and I understand where Councilor Noyes is coming from, but if the EDTC operates the way it has been operating over the last 8 years that I've been a councilor, the board of directors basically, all they did was rubber stamp what the general manager told them to do. So hopefully they'll continue to do that. And from what I understand, Carol Lee is doing a very good job of trying to clean some things up there. So if that board continues to rubber stamp, I'm confident that Carol Lee is going to find some efficiencies and some ways to save some money. But until that, having said all of that, I'm only going to support giving them last year's budget. And I think that's all we're obligated to do, and I don't think that we're allowed to give them any more. We've already passed that motion.
Thank you, Councilor Luberts. Councilor DiBona?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo some of the comments that Councilor Butler had made, and as well as that I had mentioned during the EDTC's initial presentation. I'm very pleased with the information that Ms. Grummett has provided to us moving forward. I feel optimistic that things are going to get better. I was very concerned when we originally terminated that things could go sour and it could be a bad thing. And so far, I'm pleased with the direction where things are going. And I hope that we continue moving in this positive direction. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing the report on the delivery of economic development. I think it's going to be positive for the town. And I will be supporting the amended budget with the original MOU amount. I think that's the direction to go.
Councilor Zanko?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also going to support the mayor's motion. I did want to point out, though, very similar to what Councillor Butler and Dubineau had said regarding the new general manager. But I did want to point out they are meeting their end of the agreement currently, and they're down one full-time person. So from my understanding, the request was to perhaps have someone come in on a part-time basis to help them with the backlog. I agree with what Councillor Lubert said. We are obligated to last year's funding, so that's essentially why I'm supporting the mayor's motion. But just keep that in mind. They are following through with their agreement, minus a full-time body at this point.
Councilor Noyes, and then we'll vote.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. Just to respond to some of the comments made, one was that the time to ask was when the EDTC did their budget. I don't know if the rest of you can recall, there was a lot of information that was requested that we did not know, that was just provided a few days ago. So it's pretty hard to ask questions when you don't have all the information. So that's the one response why, if I would have had all the information I had given to me on Friday when they first presented, I would have had a lot more questions. And in regards to one of the comments, and I'm hoping that this is true, that part of the agreement is that they utilize services that we select. So if that indeed is the case, then I hope that we can direct them not to put the dollars that we give them this year towards their deficit in regards to an HR matter that was created by an HR matter. If we can direct them, I don't think that's where the dollars should be going. I think we should make sure that we direct them in another direction. I do have much more confidence in the general manager, but I am concerned that, as I've talked to her on the phone, is that she needs to take her direction from the board, not from council. And that's one of the problems when you create a separate incorporation. They do not have to take direction from council. She has to take direction from her board, and hopefully the board will give her good direction. I'm just not confident in that. And in regards to them being one person down, in regards to the number of employees, again, doing the information that was provided by Ms. Grummett, in regards to other municipalities our size, they don't have 3 employees. Many of them have 1. So they may want to look at the cost for providing economic development services. I think I shared that with you last night, that it was $23 per person. And other municipalities, it's considerably less. In some cases, 2/3 less.
All in favor? I beg your pardon? All in favor? At the mayor's motion. Opposed? Thank you. Carried. We'll go to 5.7, which is the $1,882,724 for Fort Erie Library, including a $337,460 special grant. Any comments or questions? Councilor Lugert.
Yes, thank you very much. Do we have to take the $25,000 off of that? The 337?
Should be
So
312.
that's got to change, right? We note that?
Yeah. I took it over on this side.
Yeah, we took it off earlier. Now we have to do it here, right?
That would change the first figure too.
We have to take it off here as well?
Jonathan?
Yeah, through you, Chair, the corrected amount should be $1,857,724 for Fort Erie Public Library, including a $312,460 special grant.
Okay, has everybody got that? Okay. All in favor? Carried. So we'll move to part 6, that council approves the following business improvement area BIA levies for 2019. 6.1, $41,000 for Bridgeburg Station BIA. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. 6.2, $35,000 for Ridgeway BIA levy. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. 6.3, $15,000 for Crystal Beach BIA levy. All in favor? Carried. Part 7, the council approves the town's general levy of, what is it now?
Through you, Chair. So the corrected amounts for Part 7 would read, council approves the town's general levy of $27,667,351, comprised of base budget of $26,760,969, and supplementary budget of the same amount, $906,000. Oh, no, that changed. Nope, that is correct, because it is net of reserve funding, and that change was netted through reserve. So, in supplementary budget of $906,382, and direct staff to submit the related bylaw for approval. And sorry, just one other,
Shouldn't that 14,000 come out of the 906?
906,000 is just the supplementary items, and the EDTC amount was in the base budget. On Appendix 1, it's in the middle section where the $14,000 increase is removed. And just to give you an update then, I've been tracking some of the changes. So the final, with those changes, the change for the median Fort Erie household for the town portion would be adjusted to 2.02%, and the total impact for the total tax bill with what the town has available at this time for the region and education amounts would be 2.00%.
Okay, so we're moving. The motion that Jonathan just read out with the proper figures. Good way to do it? Yeah, repeat it one more time for us, Jonathan. Yeah, part 7.
Sure. Council approves the town's general levy of $27,667,351, comprised of base budget of $26,760,969 and supplementary budget of $906,382, and directs staff to submit the related bylaw for approval.
Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. So we'll go to part 8, that council excludes capital asset amortization of $6,033,400 from the 2019 general levy operating budget. Comments or questions? All in favor? Carried. Back to you, Your Worship.
So there will be no need for a meeting on March the 20th. So don't come at 6 o'clock. If you do, you'll be here by yourself. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Zanko. All those in favor? It's not going to be a budget meeting. No. So, Mr. Tom Grinch, Cookit. That's awesome. Says that we have to come on the 20th of March because there'll be a strategic planning meeting. Your plane gets in late. So where? Toronto? Gives you an hour. Buffalo. No problem. You'll be here. All those in favor of the adjournment? That is carried.